We'll now go to, we're going to switch back and forth. The first up will be those who are here in favor of this bill. Yeah, go ahead, come on up. And if you have, make sure that you filled out, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean Smith. I'm a Jackson County legislator. I was elected and began serving on January 1st, 2023. It appears that most of you are aware that Jackson County had a pretty significant issue with our assessment in 2023. I want to just spend maybe a minute describing the timeline from a taxpayer's perspective. So January 1st, 2023 becomes the effective date where the assessor guesses what everybody's property is worth. They then notify property owners statutorily in May. In our case, maybe a little after that. That's one violation we had. And then they're also supposed to notify them of their rights and describe the appeal process for them. Appeals are supposed to be handled between the months of June, July, and August. Why? Because in October, the cities, municipalities, everybody has to set their levy rate. And so they set that levy rate based on the aggregate value of properties that are in their jurisdiction so that they can establish what tax revenue they can receive and budget accordingly. Imagine you're a taxpayer and you get your assessment notice in May and it's, 3 times what your home is worth. And you say, I have to appeal this. So you file an appeal, and this is real world situation. I've filed an appeal in June. And now it is, in some cases, 2025, almost 2 years later. And their appeal still hasn't been heard by the BOE. State Tax Commission's taken action. They've said, look, you didn't follow the law. You didn't notify people on a timely basis. You didn't have a fair and open and transparent appeal process. You didn't do proper inspections to increase anybody's value by more than 15%. It is categorically obvious to anybody who's an objective observer that these things have taken place. The remedy of the taxpayer, individually, they can go to the BOE. Before that, they usually sit down with somebody from the assessment department, try to have a little negotiation, oftentimes under intimidation, that their valuation could go up. And these are not stories that are onesie-twosies. These are hundreds and hundreds of constituents who have contacted me, and probably many of you, if you're from our side of the state. So along comes the Attorney General. The Attorney General says, look, this is so wrong, I have to intervene and try to fix this. He's in the middle of a lawsuit. The lawsuit's going swimmingly. State Tax Commission says, we've heard enough in the lawsuit that we're going to exercise our statutory authority. This is now August of last year. I'm going to exercise the statutory authority. Meantime, taxpayers, of course, have experienced an increase in their mortgage payment. In some cases, their mortgage payments have doubled and tripled. They're bleeding their savings dry if they have savings, and if not, they're facing foreclosure. The timeliness of the ability to remedy an erroneous assessment is so key. And whether we're talking about an individual assessment, and I think some of you are thinking of individual appeals and individual findings by the STC, those are absolutely valid and need to be timely. Or it can be a broad order like the one the STC ordered this time, which is to roll everybody back to 15%. So August, the county says the county is required by the state to issue essentially a new tax roll that says, okay, if you reduce all of those properties that you assessed more than a 15% increase on, what does that look like? Well, the answer is $130 million that Jackson County taxpayers paid that they shouldn't have had to pay. That was basically what they were going to see on their bill. And then the county says, we're not going to follow that order, and we're going to take you to court. So now, instead of having 1 year's tax bills, $130 million that was overbilled in aggregate, it's $240 million. And to be clear, and I'm going to answer a couple of the questions that I heard earlier, to be clear, the county's not keeping that $240 million. 93% of it's being distributed out to the cities and school districts, right? It's not like we're sitting on that money. We get it, we turn around and we send it back out, similar to how the state does with respect to sales tax collection. So bottom line is, when we think about a $40 million stick against a $130 million problem, you might say, man, I wish the stick was even bigger. But the county's only keeping 7% of that 130, right? So that's a pretty big stick in our case. And the bottom line here really just comes down to one thing, and that is, should orders, lawful orders from a state commission that's there to enforce the law administratively, should those state orders be complied with on a timely basis? And if they're not, are we willing to accept the consequences? The consequences of delaying implementation of that state tax commission order from August of last year until now is literally hundreds of homeowners who are in unrecoverable situations. Once your property has been foreclosed on, not only is your credit ruined, but your home is gone. And I don't care what happens now in this trial, we can't recover that from those people. So this is at a fundamental level just about whether or not the timeliness of these orders is important, and I think we would all agree it is, and this is a wonderful suggestion for how to make sure that that happens. I want to now go back to some of the questions that I heard Representative Strickler, my representative, asked about kind of the flow of revenue. So in the case of property tax revenue, the county is the collector, and then we disperse that to the cities and municipalities. In the case of sales tax revenue, each entity, including the cities, for example, are their own, like the state is the collector and the state directly reimburses the cities. So nothing in this, unless a city violated a state tax commission order, nothing in this would cause a city to be deprived of revenue. Now, how big is that stick? Our budget is $300 million. So you think about a $40 million shortfall, and those disbursements happen frequently. They're not once a year, like property taxes for the most part are, right? So this literally says month by month by month, you are bleeding our coffers. It's an excellent incentive to have us comply, especially if we know we're eventually going to lose. And I think it's broadly accepted in this case, we're eventually going to lose. The other thing that by not having timely compliance, we're introducing the protections that are there for an individual homeowner say that you can't raise your value by more than 15% based on a prior assessed value. Well, if the prior assessed value is still in dispute and now we're assessing you for 2025, you are compounding the problem. And unraveling these problems, the longer they go on, the more complex it is to unravel these problems. Somebody asked about the 90-day period. I would agree that maybe 90 days is too long, right? When the State Tax Commission ordered us to provide them a tax roll that reflected a 15% increase as a maximum because we had violated so many of the state laws that were there to protect our citizens, I completed that task in 12 minutes in Excel. This is not hard, right? You have a list of properties. You know how much they went up. You say, what was the prior value? If it's over this percent, then drop it to this. Like the effort to do this, not hard. The politics involved when you've got cities and schools saying, oh no, this is going to take money away from us. And the reality is it would not. This is protecting individual taxpayers. But at the end of the day, through levy adjustments, no city or school district was ever going to lose money. Temporarily, maybe, right? They might have to adjust their levy for subsequent years. There's what they call a recoupment levy. They can make this up. Not a problem, but the reality is by delaying, you're harming individual citizens and you're not benefiting anybody. I guess the last thing I'll say is that I spent last week in the State Tax Commission's trial just in the gallery. As a result, I got a chance to catch up with several members of the State Tax Commission, and they seem fully supportive based on just kind of quick little conversations on the idea that they need more enforcement power. They recognize that by delaying things and dragging them through the courts, that it is not good for the taxpayers, and it sends the wrong message to other jurisdictions that might choose to go rogue like our assessor and county executive have. Last thing I'll say is that Mr. Fowler was 100% accurate when asked if the teeth in this was going to be sufficient. I think that we'd love it to be even bigger. It is what it is by expanding it to be both sales and use tax. Frankly, any revenue source that the state is sending to a county, if we're not following the rules that the state has promulgated, I would say any revenue source that you're sending us is on the table. He was absolutely accurate that right now the State Tax Commission can and has withheld money from us. $3.30 per parcel is what we get reimbursed. We have 300,000 parcels. So they've withheld from us now for 2 years about $1 million. Clearly, that's not enough. And so if you think that your state tax commission needs more enforcement authority, this seems to be a relatively good way to to achieve it. And Mr. Job, you asked about kind of some of the same things, and that was kind of how much money we talking about. $130 million for the first year that we screwed up, $130 million for the second, and if they drag this out for another year in court, that number is going to be $390 million plus whatever additional errors are result of this kind of compounding effect that I described. So I hope you guys will move this forward quickly. I hope that its effective date, I spoke to Mr. Fowler in the hallway once and I said, I'd even love it if this was enacted on an emergency basis where we didn't have to wait until August for it to become effective in state law and enforcement could begin as quickly as possible. That's all I have to say. I appreciate your time today. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Smith. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none?
Brutal, Mr. Chair. I just
Proceed.
to quick comment and I don't think I've got a question here. But thanks for bringing this forward. I think you make and we've lived the compelling case of why speed does matter on this.
Yeah.
But I think it's written. Frankly, it appears to me to be written fairly so that the counties can appeal, and that they do get interest back if they happen to win on it. I'm be surprised if Jackson does. But this helps. So, and your discussion, thanks for helping me out with the sales tax side of things, the collection, because I would really hate for our municipalities to be punished for problems, in one department in the county.
Totally agree.
Big problems, not to minimize.
Yeah.
Big problems. But I think those were the biggest concerns I had going in. So thank you very much to my legislator as well. And I, from what I've seen, unless I hear other kinds of testimony, and I will certainly be listening, so far it looks like an important thing to help keep our counties following the law and gives the state tax commission something to work with. So, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you for your testimony.